Harry Dexter White would write memoranda for Morgenthau to sign as if they were his own, and these memos would eventually become government policy. So in essence, White came to control the Treasury Department and had a very strong influence on foreign policy. In 1941, the Hitler-Stalin Pact was crumbling around the edges. The Soviets begin to panic that the Germans are about to invade them. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Japanese are the major anti-communist power, and they begin to threaten Russian territory in Siberia and Mongolia. The Soviets were now threatened on two fronts. So they asked Vitaly Pavlov, a Soviet agent stationed in the United States, to meet with Harry Dexter White and ask him to provoke a war between the United States and Japan, so they would not have to fight the Japanese themselves. Harry Dexter White may have reached out to the Russians first. He somehow assumed that the communist system had found out a way to bypass what he called Christianity and capitalism and produce a system that was destined to rule the world. And he wanted to be part of that. By 1936, he was passing information to the Soviets on a regular basis. He would take papers from his desk or from his briefcase, give them to a Soviet courier whose name was Whittaker Chambers. Chambers would have them photographed, then bring back the papers, and White would return them to his desk without anybody being the wiser. Harry Dexter White was asked to implement what the Soviets called Operation Snow. Operation Snow was a code name for starting a war between the United States and Japan by deceptive means. Each side had to feel threatened by the other so that they would fight and they would leave the Soviets free in Asia. He writes a memo that threatens Japanese sovereignty and is insulting at the same time and makes it seem as if the United States were about to attack Japan. When the Japanese Emperor Hirohito and his cabinet received the memo, they said that the Americans meant war. They knew they had no chance against America, so they decided to strike first and hope for a negotiated peace. November 26th, the Japanese launched their fleet toward Pearl Harbor, and on December 7th, the attack took place.
December 7th, 1941.
More than 2,000 Americans lost their lives at Pearl Harbor, and thousands of others died in the first few weeks of the war. White was able to start a war between the Japanese and the United States that neither country wanted, that the United States wasn't ready for, and that the Japanese knew they couldn't possibly win. In 1940s, the Finns in Finland picked up a Soviet code book. They sold it to the United States for $15,000. These are called the Venona decrypts, and they were field memos from Soviet spies in the United States to Moscow. They discovered that a man named Jurist was described as providing a large amount of valuable information and that he was a close friend of Morgenthau. By following their itinerary, they found that the man, Jurist, who was traveling with Morgenthau was Harry Dexter White. Well, White was mortified, and he actually demanded a hearing before the House Un-American Activities Committee to clear his name. In fact, he wound up virtually incriminating himself instead. He was so sure of himself that he would say, yes, he was my friend, yes, he was my friend, I knew him, and the people he was identifying as his friends were Soviet agents. He even knew about a dark room in one man's basement where state secrets had been photographed and passed to the Russians. The hearings were a disaster for White. He took a train back to his farm in New England, and on the way back, he ingested a large amount of digitalis, which he was taking as a remedy for heart problems. Digitalis in large amounts is fatal. White died 3 days later. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, after Hitler declared war on the United States, the American people were told we were fighting to liberate Europe from Hitler, which was true. We were fighting to liberate Asia from Japan, which was partly true. But the fact that we were breaking up the Japanese empire meant that somebody was going to have to protect Asia from communism. And that somebody turned out to be us.